I meant to bring my books of blood just for a specific semen quote, but I forgot.
This podcast is not suitable for children or those who are easily disturbed. Spoiler warning for whatever is in the title of this episode.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. Follow Daniel at DStarSick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at Darth Damio on the Bluebird app. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. And finally, you can let your friends know that the Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Podcast Addict, TuneIn and the iHeartRadio app.
Welcome to episode 46 and season 2 of the Horror of Babylon, where we are discussing The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. I'm Ryan, and with me, as always, is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
We have finally made it to season 2 of The Horror of Babylon. I wasn't sure that was going to happen when we clicked record on that first episode of The Stand a year ago.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Yeah. You just keep chugging along.
We are the little train that could. I think we're still on the uphill part.
Yeah, I like the uphill part.
But, I mean, eventually we'll get to the downhill part where it's just like money and and...
bitches and puzzle boxes.
No. No.
No puzzle boxes for Ryan.
Nope, none for me. Okay, so let's go ahead. Since we are starting a new book and an author we've never read before for the podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about our history with this book, our history with the film based on it, Hellraiser, and a little bit with about our history with Clive Barker. Daniel, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Okay, so my history with Clive Barker starts, as most people's do, with Blockbuster. I would always go and rent movies on the weekends. I loved Freddy, I loved Jason. And, you know, people always put this pinhead-looking guy up with them when they would talk about, like, famous movie slashers. I'd never seen Hellraiser. I saw it in the movie store and went, oh, you know what? I'm gonna rent Hellraiser. And I was expecting, like, a slasher film. And I got something that is not really a slasher movie. It was a really strange, surreal, introspective look on psychosexuality, and just presented in a very bloody way. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I'm hard and I want more of it. So I kept seeing, like, it's Clive Barker's Hellraiser. And I was like, oh, okay, must be a director or something. Eventually I find out he's a writer. I go and I want to read one of his books. I get The Damnation Game. It's a book I read in college, I think. It was either college or late high school. Very, very decent book. It's also structured unlike anything I had read before. Clive Barker writes very differently from Stephen King. I think anyone who's read the two of them can attest to that. Their books aren't really structured or presented the same. I really enjoyed that, and from there, you know, I got the Hellbound Heart. I read that. I've recently got a newer copy because couldn't find my old one. I got that last year because I had a gift card to what's that really big bookstore chain, Barnes & Noble, and got that. I've read all the books of Blood, which are he's probably, aside from Hellraiser, he's probably most famous for the books of Blood, which are his short story works that are often compiled. Ryan has this quote up here that I put into our notes. I talked to a buddy of ours in college, Wes, because everyone I knew liked horror back then. Wes was no different. And I said, oh, Clive Barker's like my favorite horror author. He's like my idol. He's who I wanted to write like. And his response was, ooh, Clive Barker? He's basically the elfin lead of horror. I think there's a certain amount of truth to that. I think that that's also an oversimplification, but we're going to get into that later, especially when we compare it to our second quote about Clive Barker by someone a little bit more famous than Wes. And at the end of this, I'm going to ask Ryan, on a sliding scale, which of these statements rings closer to true. So, passing it off to Ryan.
I saw Hellraiser in my 20s. I remember when I watched it, I was like, wow, this is really good. It didn't inspire me to go on and watch any of the sequels or read the book, but I do remember really liking it. I've only seen the movie one time. I haven't rewatched it since. I'm going to rewatch it for next week's episode where we're covering the movie, but I have not actually done that rewatching yet. So this recording is me watching the movie 8 or 10 years ago and just now reading the book for the first time.
It's going to be exciting to get like your fresh rewatch of the movie.
Yeah, because I feel like in my head it's pretty good. Mm-hmm. Now reading this book, I have questions.
I could answer a lot of them, but I think it'll be better if we put that off.
Yeah, I'm going to try and hold off with those questions and comparing to the movie until next week's episode. But in my head, like, what I thought of that movie and then reading this book, I'm like, wait, what? But we'll get there.
I will say, I will go ahead and spoil this. It is one of the rare instances where I think the movie is actually better.
I've actually seen that opinion quite a few times. That seems to be kind of the common consensus.
But it was also written and directed by the dude who wrote the book. Yeah. So that's just interesting.
Okay, so background on Clive Barker himself.
Okay, here's the second quote here. I have seen the future of horror, and his name is Clive Barker, Stephen King. I don't remember when Stephen King said that. Did I write the year down?
No.
But it was about his books of blood.
I know that while King was writing it in the early to mid 80s, he was going through a depression because he felt like Barker was better than him, was the superior horror author, and he, to the point where King just didn't want to do horror anymore.
I can't write about psychosexuality. Where's my kids in my sewer?
Spoiler alert, I'm a King guy, but if I think Barker may have him beat in the specific genre of psychosexuality horror.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think Stephen King has a few good books left in him before he dies, so maybe he'll come up with something. We'll see.
Barker was born October 5th, 1952. Getting up there in age now. Multifaceted artist. He's done a little bit of everything. He has a background in theater. He has written children's books, known for writing fantasy, horror fantasy, and just straight up horror. One of his most famous works is the Books of Blood, which there are several movie adaptations of those short stories. Almost all of them are garbage, at least in my opinion. Sorry, everybody. And Hulu has a Books of Blood series that I haven't watched yet.
Like an anthology series?
Yeah, that are based off of his short stories.
That sounds like it could be good.
Yeah, so I've been meaning to check that out. I ended up watching the new Hellraiser before I watched that, so I was just more excited for it. The Books of Blood came out in 1984, The Damnation Game in 1985, and The Hellbound Heart in 1986. Barker's sexual orientation. This is one of the other reasons I wanted to cover him. He has been openly gay pretty much his entire career. I tried to find like a quote-unquote like coming out story, and he really didn't have one. He just was always just, yeah, I'm gay. It's just something people know.
I did not know he was gay until I read your notes.
Yeah, openly gay. And I think if you read more of his work, I don't know how clear that comes across in this specific book.
I don't think I would have picked up on it at all.
But it becomes super obvious. The way Stephen King writes about titties...
You know he loves titties. Because he cannot describe a female character without telling you what her breasts are like.
Clive Barker writes about the taste of semen exactly like that. So...
Okay, cool.
So if you've ever wanted like a compare and contrast, I meant to bring my Books of Blood just for a specific semen quote, but I forgot. We might cover the Books of Blood eventually.
Yeah.
There's 3 volumes. I have all of the volumes in one single collection. And like most short story anthologies, There's some winners, there's some losers. The Hellbound Heart, published in 1986, inspired by Barker's work as a hustler and S&M clubs, specifically the Cell Block 28 Club in New York City. I don't know anything about Cell Block 28. I kind of want to visit it now and see how much I cry. That could be our next trip instead of the Mothman Festival. Something I forgot to put in my notes here is, and I can't remember the years, at some point, Clive Barker did suffer from throat cancer, and it was allegedly pretty bad, but he recovered. He's still alive now. Throat cancer has a pretty high mortality rate, so that's actually pretty cool. Just me gushing over him for a minute, this man's one of my idols. Even stuff like his sexuality and the way he writes about sex are some of the things that made me more open-minded as a person. I used to be even more conservative than I am these days. But then I started exposing myself to artists like Clive Barker and going, oh, okay, well, maybe this shit ain't so bad. Maybe the taste of semen, maybe it goes down just fine with your titties.
Just like a yoo-hoo.
Yeah.
Just like a good cold yoo-hoo.
I only bring this up because I think, like, when people talk about representation, sometimes they forget that when you expose somebody to something like this, maybe they'll start to see some of themselves in other people. And I saw a lot of myself in some of Clive Barker's work.
Yeah.
And that was all part of Daniel's sexual journey, which is a roller coaster. So, let's see here. The Hellbound Heart spawned a film franchise. I think there's like 9 or 10 films now total.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, we're not watching all of them because they're not worth it at the time.
The original and the new one.
I also think the first sequel to the original is good, but that's about where I'd stop.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a bonus episode on that one. We'll see.
Yeah, just maybe if we need some content down the road. I keep forgetting this until I see it in notes, or when I'm looking this shit up, where I wanted to name the movie Sadomasochist from Hell.
I don't think that went over very well.
And the studio was like, no. And I told Ryan in our notes that I couldn't verify this, but I have this distinct memory. Maybe it was in an interview or something. I'm going to try to look it up. Where he wrote this novella to try to get the movie made.
Just like Miyazaki with Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind.
Yeah. I swear I have this distinct memory.
Or George Lucas with Star Wars.
Yeah, where he's just talking about it. He's like, yeah, I wanted to get this movie made, but they wanted to know that the script would sell, so I wrote a book and sold it. But maybe I'm imagining that entire scenario. It wouldn't be the first time I was wrong.
Yeah, it turned out with a pretty decent book. So
yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump into structures and themes. And before we do that, a little bit, I felt like the structure of this book was pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. Would you say that this is a typical structure of a Barker book, or
he does a lot of point A, point B. Something that he does a lot of, it's like third person omniscience. Mm-hmm. But he'll go from like a shifting perspective in that it's this character's thought and this character's thought.
The only time that I had was even like thinking about the structure while I was listening to it is sometimes it would jump to another character and I wouldn't realize it right away. It happened a couple times with Kirsty specifically. Yeah. I probably should have taken notes and said, in this chapter, but that was, other than that, I felt like it was a pretty, it's chronological and there aren't like anything like too complicated in it, but I didn't know if that was normal for him.
There's one section, and I think he also does something similar in the Damnation game, which is a book I'll probably push in season 3. It was like Kirsty's perspective. She was talking to Rory. They changed his name in the movie, so I keep getting some of these names backwards. But then he would put in brackets like a conversation between Frank and Julia. And
yeah, see, I did the audiobook, so I wouldn't have caught that. But that may have been a point where I got confused.
Yeah, so there'll be these little brackets, and then it shows it's Frank and Julia's conversation going on here at the same time that this conversation's happening.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen too much stuff exactly like that in books. Usually people will just switch the scene completely.
Yeah.
But Clive Barker does occasionally do little things like that where he's like, no, just this stuff's happening at the same time, so it's going to be in the same chapter.
All right, Clive.
So,
I want to call him Clyde Frog.
Hey, Clyde Frog. Excuse me.
All right, so let's jump into some themes, and we've got quite the list of them here.
Ryan, tell me your thoughts on sadomasochism.
I knew from the movie going into this that the line between, pleasure and pain would be a thing, but I had to look up sadomasochism, and it's being a sadist and being a masochist. Basically, they did a fusion dance, and that's sadomasochism. And I don't really care to know any more past that.
Are you pro or anti-leather?
Neither.
Neither.
I'd say I abstain. Okay. Just like leather in the bedroom.
Just in general.
In general, neither. But if you made me
now in the bedroom,
if you made me pick one, I'd say anti. Just because it gets hot in the summer and gets cold in the winter.
The book doesn't focus on the leather nearly as much as the movies do. The book is much more. There's hooks and chains through them, or bells and whistles and pins. In the movie, it's a lot of leather on top of that stuff, like leather daddies or mommies. Doms, all sorts of stuff you'd see in S&M clubs. So sadomasochism, very, very, very clearly, this book is talking about the boundaries between pleasure and pain and what it means to go too far with it. Sensory overload and things not being exactly what you expect. It almost reminds me of, this is totally not the intent, but if you wanted to force a point in there, it could be allegorical for somebody going into a club not knowing what to expect and getting in over their head. Like, oh no, I'm into S&M. I've been spanked on the butt once.
The closest I can draw to that in my own life was me going into a mosh pit thinking I knew what it was / I wanted it, rolling on the ground to try and get out from under people and running for my life.
So Frank thinks he knows what pleasure and pain is.
Well, I mean, I don't want to defend Frank because he's a piece of shit, but I don't think he was just lied to. There was no pain in the brochure. It was just the pleasure part.
Pain is pleasure.
Granted, I don't feel too bad because he's a piece of shit, but or was.
Yeah.
All right. So, sex.
There's a lot of sex.
A little bit about sex in this book.
There's infidelity. There's normal sex. There's sex with your husband while the man you really love, who's been skinned alive, is in the closet watching.
He's just a bag of bones.
One of my favorites is when one of the first Cenobites arrives after watching Frank jerk off, and she's on a throne of heads, and the tongues are all over her legs, even though they're just rotting heads.
And the only reason he has any chance to come back at all is because he jerked off. Because he left some physical amount of himself in the corporeal world, and that mixed with blood gave him the chance to come back as a scrotum with eyes.
The blood from his brother.
Yeah. Yeah. So he just happened to jerk off on the floor, and then his brother just happened to cut himself in the same spot, and they did a brother sperm blood fusion dance so that Frank could come back from Pinhead's playhouse as a scrotum with a face.
I love Pinhead's playhouse. Spoilers for people who haven't read the book. Pinhead's not really in this book very much.
No.
Shows up exactly for one sentence.
And he's not called Pinhead. Is he ever called Pinhead in the movie, or is that just...
No, that was a fan nickname.
Okay,
that sort of stuck.
That's what I kind of
I think he's called the Hell Priest in the movies. In the credits, quote-unquote, Pinhead is described as having a wispy, almost female voice.
And then in the new film, Pinhead is female, correct?
Yeah, I believe she's played by a trans actress, too.
Okay, cool. Cool.
If all of my knowledge is not getting mixed up with other movies.
Which could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rejection of the Mundane. So this is a reading that I never thought of before until, this past year. I watched a video essay about the movie through the lens of viewing it as an addiction allegory. So when I read it this was my third time reading, I was like, I'm going to read this as if the book is talking about addiction. And so it plays a lot like this, and it's sort of a Freudian reading on psychology, on dopamine releases. Freud wrote a lot about the more sex you have, the less pleasurable it gets, because your dopamine isn't going to give you the same sort of releases each time.
I read the exact same thing recently, except for it's about ice cream. The more often you eat ice cream, the more you have to eat of it to get the same level of dopamine.
So that's what the Cenobites represent.
Ice cream.
Yeah, are the extreme. They're like the 2 tubs at 2 a.m. of ice cream that you have to eat.
Because you have ice cream every day instead of once every couple weeks.
And Frank even talks about this, how he just did all this dope and drugs and fucked all these beautiful women, but doesn't mean anything anymore because he's not getting anything from it. So he finds this box that's going to unlock a whole new world. And so then you get Julia, and she's really the one where this addiction thing comes in. There's the little bit of blood from her husband, and gives her a glimpse of what she really wants. That's the first hit. Then she kills a man, and the guy she really wants comes into the world. But no, now she needs even more blood, and more the next time, until she's finally getting what she wants, which is this idealized version of a man.
And then it ends up killing her.
AKA the addiction to, could be drugs, sex, food. Could be just addiction in general.
Video games. Goddamn.
So I just thought that was an interesting read, so I wanted to include it in the notes.
Yeah, I can see that. That's cool.
Yeah.
So, rejection of the mundane, aka I have no sympathy for these two characters. My life is so boring.
I've traveled to 50 different countries and fucked all these Brazilian bitches.
Oh, my life is terrible. Oh, boo-hoo.
I have a loving husband in a nice 3-story house.
Yeah.
That we didn't have to pay for.
Yeah, I'm going to save my thoughts on that until we actually get to Julia, but yeah, I have no sympathy for her or Frank.
I don't have sympathy for them. I do think it's an interesting thing to write about characters that are like this. It's
funny because I spent today editing an episode we may or may not release on a book that about characters that are terrible and you don't like.
Yeah.
But this is also about, there's essentially
some horrible people.
Yeah. And I don't like them, and I have no sympathy for them. And honestly, they don't really have any redeeming qualities either. However, the story is so compelling, and their terribleness feeds into the story.
I think that's why it works in this instance. Plus, they're fucking punished.
Yeah. Super hard.
So, I think that makes those sorts of stories more palatable.
Yeah, they're all punished instead of just one of the 5.
Yeah. Spoiler alert for my book, I'm very influenced by Clive Barker. I wrote about horrible people who I think are doing horrible things, and I tried to make sure they all got punished in some way. Forbidden knowledge and practices, I think that one, you find the forbidden object, you find the journal about Cthulhu.
Yeah, I was going to say, it immediately put me in the mind of Call of Cthulhu.
A lot of people link Clive Barker and H.P. Lovecraft, and I think there's a mixing degree of success when you're mixing those two. Mm-hmm. Clive Barker is much more, I don't want to say he's more grand in scope, because H.P. Lovecraft wrote about cosmicism, but he wrote about cosmicism and how it affects like small town America, where Clive Barker, it might be writing about just this one family, but he's talking about like the psychosexuality of man.
They're grained in different ways, I guess.
But they use a lot of the same, like, what would you call it, a MacGuffin?
Yeah.
Like, here's this object that will lead you to the thing, and here's the forbidden knowledge from, quote-unquote, the cult. Human sensation. Ryan, how did human sensation come across to you in this book?
Made my skin crawly.
Made your skin crawl a little bit.
I listened to this book almost entirely in one go. The children were not home. I was spending the day doing housework, so I put on my headphones, hit play, and like almost listened to the entire thing without stopping. And I was entertained. I was never bored listening to this book. There were a couple points where the skin was getting a little creepy crawly, and I was like, okay, let's pause this and get a drink of water. And like, I am not, it's just a little bit about me personally, I'm not good with pain. I generally can be a little bit of a baby about pain. There were some turnoffs in this book.
I have experimented. I am also not really a fan of pain.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
So let's go ahead and jump into characters. And I'll give you kind of my brief impression on each of these characters, and then you can tell me why I'm right or wrong. Julia, did not like Julia at all. I don't want to criticize her for not being happy in the situation she's in, but my advice to her would have been, if you're not happy with Rory, divorce him and leave him. Don't do this. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Julia.
I agree.
Yay!
I think it's a very well written. I'm a bored housewife and I'm making myself the victim character.
Yeah, and it's really easy to demonize that kind of woman in a book or a movie, and I don't want to do that, even though I don't like the character. I want to demonize her for the things she ends up doing, like murdering people and trying to resurrect Frank, and eventually letting her husband be killed and blah blah blah.
Fucking Frank on her wedding day, on top of her wedding dress.
But I don't want to demonize her for like the being a bored housewife for the initial adultery, for the I mean not that it's a what I mean. Adultery is not okay.
Yeah.
It's better than murdering people.
It is. I'll give you that. It is better than murdering people for the dude you had an affair with, which is your husband's brother, Frank.
He also sucks, but I don't have any kind of positive defense for him. He just blows.
Come to daddy.
He's icky. He's creepy. There's no redeeming qualities, but it works for the story.
Yeah.
I don't know if this book would have worked if you put a likable character in Frank's place. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think a likable character would have gotten into Frank's place, because Frank's whole thing is like, oh no, I've lived in the id for so long that now I get nothing from it, and now I have to go to this fantastical extreme.
Even suicide's too mundane for me.
I know. Oh my god, I hated that. I was like, oh my god, you suck.
If nothing matters, then killing myself even doesn't matter.
Yeah, so we said once that if you want to establish a villain as a bad guy, have him kill a dog in the first scene of the movie. This is another way you can do it, is have the inner monologue at the beginning of the book say something like that.
Yeah. I also agree.
Okay. Kirsty, I guess, is the most likable character, but
she exists.
Yeah. What I wish is, it's never explicitly said like what her relationship to Rory is.
Yeah.
Like at the beginning of the book, I thought she was like his sister, and then it's like, oh no, she likes Rory. Are they like, were they friends? Did they used to date? Like, you never got like any explanation for that.
Her biggest like character trait is being jealous of how hot Julia is.
And that's the thing, like, yes, I guess she's the most likable character for me, but I also kind of don't like her because she's just so hung up on Rory instead of, getting her own shit together. But, by the second half of the book, none of this matters, because I want one good person to live. Somebody gets to live. And I was really surprised that it had such a quote-unquote happy ending.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I guess those are my thoughts on the deeply 3D character that is Kirsty, with no last name.
I think the movie does an excellent job upgrading her, but we'll talk about that when we get to the movie.
I don't specifically remember any of these characters from the movie. What I remember from the movie is essentially the Cenobites. That's what I remember. And then Rory, I guess ultimately I should feel bad for Rory, but I also think he should have seen some of the signs. I think maybe he should have paid a little more attention to Julia. I don't want to say, oh, it's his fault that she cheated, but I do think that he maybe should have picked up on the fact that she wasn't happy instead of trying to pressure her into sex all the time.
I think that, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about is I think Clive Barker made a very not a compelling case for Julia cheating, but a very compelling dynamic of we have this character who comes in and he's basically drunk when he comes home from work all the time, and he whines and basically begs for sex, and she starts to view him as this just pathetic dude.
Yeah, I don't think he doesn't seem like a bad guy, but it seems like a bad relationship.
I really hate this sort of terminology. He gives off real beta energy.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better... If I knew a better word, I would use it.
I think if I were Julia, I also would not want to be married to Rory.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because, the whole time I'm reading this, I was like, ugh, it seems like Julia would be better with Frank and Kirsty would be better with Rory. They should just switch. And then everybody'd be okay.
Everything would be cool.
Everything would be fine.
Yeah.
But, of course, that's not the way things happen. But yeah, I think a lot of this could have been solved if Rory just paid a little bit more attention to Julia and noticed she was so unhappy. Not that justifies her adultery or her eventual murders. It doesn't make any of that okay, but that definitely would have helped in the beginning.
I just think that his behavior helps characterize Julia's decisions.
Yeah, it doesn't justify anything she does, but it makes it more understandable.
Yeah, I can understand how she got from point A to point B.
Like I said, if I were her, I would not want to be married to this guy either.
Yeah.
Okay, and then our last characters, which will also carry us over into scary shit, is the Cenobite.
I'll kill you all! I'll drive you crazy, and I'll kill you all! I'm every nightmare you ever had. I am your worst dream come true. I'm everything you ever were afraid of.
Are they characters?
I think as a whole, you kind of get what's going on with them. The only one that seemed to be important in this actual book was the engineer, who only shows up. He's mentioned at the beginning. He shows up at the end, and he passes the puzzle box off to Kirsty after he takes Julia away. And he's a being of pure light and energy. How do you feel about the scary shit related to the Cenobites?
I would never, ever be in that situation. And if I were in that situation, my mind would probably snap in two.
Okay, because I do have some questions when we get down to the homework related to Cenobites. So,
okay.
Well, I guess I'll table that for now.
And I couldn't, every time I heard it, as cinnamon bites.
Cinnamon bites.
I just pictured cinnamon rolls being cut up with a fork and a knife.
I do think that the Cenobites have a lot of great quotes in this book, and in the movie they just give all of them to Pinhead.
Aww.
Which is we have such sights to show you. If you aren't lying to us, maybe we won't tear your soul apart.
Aww. I liked how there was a crew of them.
There's still a crew of them, but they're all sort of ambiguous which ones where. Just this is a hooked thing with bells in its throat, or this is a leather cloud thing with a swollen face.
I don't know if sensory overload would make me masturbate.
Yeah.
But we'll get there. Okay, so being skinned and being put back together. I don't think I'd want to be put back together.
AKA what happened to Frank. Does that terrify you at all?
I mean, if it happened to me, obviously it would. But no, honestly, it's so unrealistic, it doesn't really scare me.
Okay.
I don't... This book kind of creeped me out. Mm-hmm. But it's so out of left field. It didn't really scare me. I thought the scariest parts were the more realistic parts, the being hit on by a woman at a bar and her offering to take you home and then
murdering you.
Yeah.
AKA knife play.
or you being a blue-collar American dude and not paying enough attention to your wife and it ends with you getting murdered by your brother and having your essence sucked out of you. It's like, well, maybe you should have paid attention to your wife, dude. But, yeah. Is it scary for you?
I am terrified of the idea of it. Of that there's something out there that could literally do that to you and then leave you in such a state. It's like the same way I find like the Christian or the Buddhist hell scary. Like the idea that could be a thing terrifies me. But actually reading about it, not so much.
Yeah. Hell, like the Christian idea of hell, like, yes, obviously, if that were real and I were there, I would be terrified and it would be awful. Mm-hmm. But I'm just like so desensitized to that particular vision of the afterlife. I don't know what happens after you die.
I'm honestly more afraid that there might be something like a Cenobite that would skin me alive so many times until I came. So that's what its idea of pleasure is.
Ew.
Yeah.
My thought with hell is like, if you're just in fire all the time, wouldn't you eventually get used to it like a hot tub?
Yeah, like you get bored.
Yeah. And then you have to fiddle with a puzzle box to go to an even worse hell.
I've been down here for 10 trillion years. There's nothing you can do to me.
Yeah. like
eternity's eternity.
Bring it on. It's just like tell the devil when he gets back from his honeymoon with Saddam that
I honestly pictured that if hell was real, that it would end up like that, because everyone's just gotten so used to it that the only people who are afraid are the people who first show up. But like Hitler and everyone else down there is just like, yeah, no, we've been down here so long, it's all chill.
Does South Park use Putin these days like it used to use Saddam Hussein?
I have not watched South Park in like 3 or 4 years.
I gotta imagine they do.
Yeah. I have Paramount Plus again, so I've been thinking about getting caught up. I did watch their COVID special, only because I was interested in the adult versions of the characters.
Yeah,
I was curious. And after watching it, I was like, I think they should just do this. I think that they should make a radical change to their formula, something like this, and just do that for a couple seasons.
Or, they could do it for 5 episodes and see how people react.
Yeah. So... But that's my opinion with a lot of these like long running shows. I'm like, I can't watch Family Guy because I've seen, after so many seasons, you've seen every Family Guy episode. What else can they do?
Yeah, I agree.
The only one I really sort of give a pass to is Archer, because for some reason I still find it funny, and American Dad because it has Steve Smith.
For me, it's just The Simpsons, and that's less to do with the show itself, and it's more that I have been with those characters since I was literally 8 years old. And, watched it basically every week for the past 25 years. And then I'm not caught up on American Dad. What usually happens is I let it go for 2 or 3 years, and then I get caught up.
And then binge watch what there is.
Yeah, and that's only because of Steve. I would not watch that show if it weren't for Steve.
I think we should do Wheels in the Leg Man at one of the conventions we go to.
You've said that so many times.
Yeah, I'll even let you be Steve.
Okay.
I have a wheelchair.
Are you going to paint yourself gray?
I was going to put on like an alien costume and then put a human costume on it for it.
Wheels in the Leg Man. I still will just randomly start singing Stelio Contos. Just all. And the
F can be Stelio Contos.
Stelio. Stelio Contos. Stelio.
There you go.
Peak American Dad.
Kiss me, fat boy.
I feel like if King of the Hill was still on, I would watch it.
Yeah.
But I also, while it was airing, I kind of stopped watching during those last 4 or 5 years, and then when it got on Netflix, that's when I got back into it and watched those last 4 or 5 seasons.
Part of that, I feel, is they kind of sandwiched it right before or right after all of these fucking Seth MacFarlane cartoons.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as advertised as heavily, so people started falling off.
Yeah, but I feel like even in that period, I was probably actively watching Family Guy, and I was definitely actively watching The Simpsons, so I don't know why I also wasn't actively watching King of the Hill. But I watched King of the Hill every Sunday with The Simpsons for years.
Yeah.
In the early seasons.
Oh, excuse me.
Or not early, but like probably like the mid seasons, the middle years, the middle school years.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
Are the Cenobites related to the Christian idea of hell?
I don't think so.
Okay. I didn't know.
I think that they're just mostly a Clive Barker trying to play with concepts of what you would expect to find on the other side. The Cenobites even say it themselves in the movies. I can't remember if it's a direct quote from the book, that they're angels to some and demons to others. It just depends on what you want.
God, who are they angels to?
This is a spoiler alert for like the film franchise, but all the Cenobites used to be people. And that apparently was part of Clive Barker's idea, was they're people who solved the puzzle box. So this is what would have happened to Frank if he would have stayed on the other side long enough. He would have become a Cenobite.
Oh. And then you get to deliver the pain.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so that's the end goal, and that's revealed in like the second Hellraiser movie that we're not going to be reviewing.
Okay.
Oh my God! Are you Stephen King? No, I'm Dean Koontz. Oh.
All right, Kings and Koontz. I'm gonna have you go first, but I'm gonna spoil, and I'm gonna say that my King and my Koontz are the same thing.
They're the same thing.
They're the same thing.
Oh God, I have played around with my Kings and my Koontzes for this book for so long. I think I just ultimately settled on just how sexed up this book is in the weirdest way as my King. Like, the way Clive Barker writes about this stuff tickles me pink.
My King and my Koontz are the Cinnamon Bites. King because, to me, like, they're the main takeaway. They're the coolest, most mysterious thing about the book. They're literally the only thing I remember about the movie.
Yeah.
I remember it's a new house, and there's blood, and there's a girl, and there's cinnamon bites. That's what I remember.
They're very memorable.
Yeah.
They're very aesthetically pleasing.
They're also my Koontz because, to me, there's not enough world building in this book. I want more information about them, but I also acknowledge at the same time that their mystique and the mystery and the lack of knowledge is one of their pros, but I want a little bit more. I don't want too much, but I want to know a little bit more about them.
My Koontz is unfortunately Kirsty, because I think that she's kind of sort of just exists in most of this book.
I think she exists so that there's a not bad person who gets to not die.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I feel, and again, I think the movie almost turns her into my King with the one simple change that I think fixes all my problems. But I don't want to talk about that until we get to it. So
okay, yeah, I'll rewatch that soon. Yeah. Okay, ranking. We're ranking now. You did Kings and Koontz first, so I will rank first. This is going to be my new number 8. It's going to be below the Scarlet Plague and above Nothing But Blackened Teeth. And I do want to put an asterisk on this. I like this book. I was entertained. I thought this book was good. Yes, it's low on my list, but I really like all the books on this list with the exception of the two on the bottom.
Yeah.
So me putting it on the kind of at the bottom of my list is not me dissing it. I think this book is great. I would recommend it unless you have like a pain thing. If pain is a trigger for you, maybe don't read this book. But yeah, so that's my thing.
If reading about jars of urine and dove heads triggers you, do not read Clive Barker.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Yeah.
Maybe his children books. I haven't read those yet.
Oh yeah, we should do one of those and do a bonus episode.
Gosh. This one's really hard for me.
And just to talk a little bit more and give you a second, I really like this book, but it's not in my typical like wheelhouse of horror. I really like fantasy and world building, and you know the books that are high on my list are like the Only Good Indians and It, where you like really detailed and fleshing out the characters and getting all this background about. And that is not the Hellbound Heart.
I definitely like it more than the Confederado.
Yes. I would be concerned if you didn't.
I'd almost call it the good version of Nothing But Blackened Teeth.
Yeah, I actually, unfortunately, I was comparing it to Nothing But Blackened Teeth a lot while I was reading it. And
yeah, it's short. The characters don't have a lot of depth. They're not great people.
I actually think that Nothing But Blackened Teeth had the better premise, but...
Yeah, it also is very prosy.
Yeah.
Which is something I usually don't like, but I liked it here for some reason.
No, I really enjoyed Clive Barker's writing. It was there were a lot of lines that I was just like, wow, that was pretty. Like,
I think I'm going to have to put it right below Phantoms.
So that would make it your number 6. So my 8 and your 6.
I wanted to put it higher, but I really couldn't justify it being above The Mist. Because I think The Mist is the best, at least from what we've read, like the best novella length thing that exists.
I would agree.
Firestarter just ticks too many of my boxes. The Stand, aside from its ending, is a very stellar book. And Phantoms has a lot of the like personal horror that I like.
I also have Phantoms over the Hellbound Heart. If we were rating this differently, and if we were saying like, okay, if we're going for like consistency throughout the book, then I would probably put the Hellbound Heart above Phantoms. But the high points of Phantoms for me are so much better than the Hellbound Heart. So,
and I thought it would be a lot higher because this is one of the, like, Clive Barker's a author who's personally important to me because he's been involved in so much of my like character journey through my writing, sexuality, that sort of shit. But at the same time, that doesn't make me like this book more than.
And we've also read some really good books.
Yeah, we've mostly just read some stellar stuff. So
yeah, I mean, even like prior to this, like the books that we had on the bottom are like Carmilla, Phantoms, The Scarlet Plague, and those are all really good books.
Yeah.
All right, homework. The most obvious homework of all time. Would you try to solve the puzzle box?
Okay, now this is where my question is, Ryan. Mm-hmm. Do you know what the puzzle box does when you find it?
No.
Because that changes my answer. Then I would solve it. I fiddle with things that I find.
Oh, I thought you were asking me personally.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well...
Like, you don't know what this thing does. You're Kirsty in the hospital room. They give you this box. Do you dick around with it?
If I were Kirsty, yes, I probably would try to solve it. However, I'm really bad with those kinds of things.
Also true, me too.
So I probably would not succeed. But if I were Frank and I knew what it was, then no, I would not mess with it.
That changes my answer. If I know what it does, my answer is no. Like, I'm
not bored with regular life.
Yeah, I am also not bored with regular sex. Though maybe the salesman goes, no, this will give you even better pleasure, Dan. And I can see me being stupid and going, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But
I would like to say I wouldn't. Of course, I don't know what I would do in any particular moment.
But if I just find the thing or someone hands it to me and says I was grasping it in my hands, I think I'm going to end up in a pretty bad place.
I do like to fiddle with things.
Yeah. Yeah, I blame whatever sensory issues I have.
I have never solved a Rubik's Cube.
Me either, so
I think I might be safe. Okay, and then our question for the listeners is the same thing. Please reach out to us on our socials, which you're about to hear. Let us know if you would try to solve the box. And if you have suggestions for books that we should read for Season 2, please let us know. We do have a rough schedule for the full year. However, there are some openings in that schedule whenever we get a date for Salem's Lot. If we get a date for Salem's Lot, it'll be rearranged. And even if nothing changes, we'll probably just move things around and add and subtract things, because that's what we do. We can't seem to stick to a schedule, which is probably a good thing. We shouldn't set a whole year's worth of content a year ahead of time anyway. But we just have a kind of a rough draft. So if there's a book you really want to hear us talk about, let us know, and we'll consider it. If you want to make sure that we cover a particular book, go to patreon.com/horrorbabylon. Check out our tiers.
Further reading. Okay, so this was my... we have Elfin Lead question mark down here. But my question for Ryan is, between Wes's quote and Stephen King's quote on a sliding scale, which book, what does this give you the impression of? Which quote is more right?
So, I definitely can see where Wes was coming from.
It's gory and horny.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit more intelligence and meaning behind Clive Barker's gory and horny than there is behind Elfin Lead's gory and horny.
Okay.
However, I have not watched Elfin Lead since I was like a junior in high school.
One of these days I'll get us to cover the manga so he can really tear into something.
But I also don't think that I also don't think Clive Barker is the future of horror. Does he even still write?
He still writes. He quit horror for a while and focused on like fantasy, younger people's books, mostly just because he got sick of writing the same thing.
Based on this one book,
yeah,
I would disagree with Stephen King and say, no, you are the better writer. Get your head out of your butt. But I thought this book was great. I want to and will read more Clive Barker. And I don't want to definitively say King is better after reading one Barker book. I would definitely... I will tell you this. I think that after reading a couple more of his books, I could definitely see him being better than Dean Koontz. So it may be... We might change our thing to, okay, what is your favorite thing, your King, your least favorite thing, your Koontz, and what was that thing that was just kind of in between, your Barker?
Yeah, where's your Barker at?
What's your Barker? What were you kind of medium on?
I think we have to say Barkas now.
Yeah, so I guess I don't really agree with either quote.
Okay, so so far you're right in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, I was curious. That's why I included both quotes in the notes.
Upcoming on the Horror Babylon next week, we will be covering Hellraiser from 1987, the original film adaptation of this novella. The next week, on Sunday, November 20th, we will be covering another novella by the much made fun of, but still very much loved and appreciated Dean Koontz. We're doing The Bone Farm, which is the first of...
The Bone Farm!
I think the character's name is Jane Hawk. It's the first of his Jane Hawk books. I bet it's not Jane Hawk, and I sound like an idiot. But I'm not going to edit this. I'm just going to leave it, leave it like it is. And then the next week, we are going to cover the newest Hellraiser film. Is Hellraiser 2022 an adaptation of the Hellbound Heart?
No, not really. It's sort of just a reimagining using elements from the previous movies and the book.
Okay, that's fine.
They made the Cenobites like 100% more fuckable.
Ugh. I don't know.
You're gonna see it and 100% disagree with me, so...
That doesn't sound good on paper.
Yeah.
But I will try to reserve judgment until I actually see the movie.
No, you're gonna remember this quote and you're gonna want to scoot even further away from me.
No, Daniel, those are not fuckable. Okay. And then the first 2 weeks of December, we will cover the novel Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter by Seth Graham Smith of Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies fame. The next week, we will cover the film adaptation of that book. And then our last 2 weeks of December, we are going to cover fucking Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and the 1931 film adaptation of that book. We are also going to do some other adaptations of Frankenstein starting in January of 2023. Which, by that January 2023, will make it so that this podcast has spanned over 3 years, starting in October of 2021 into 2023. So,
dang.
Yeah. Not 3 full years, obviously.
Yeah, but still.
Yeah. Whew. Okay, so yeah, that'll do it. Thank you for reading The Hellbound Heart and recording with me tonight, Daniel.
It was a pleasure.
Ugh. Ew, I'm gonna go take a shower. I feel gross. Ugh. So stay tuned for our socials and stay scary.
Stay scary, everybody.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow Daniel at dstarsick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at Darth Damio on the Bluebird app. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher, and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. And finally, you can let your friends know that the Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Podcast Addict, TuneIn, and the iHeartRadio app. Stay scary.